So, man, I've been wanting to film this video because everyone close to me and anyone who works with me has heard me talk about my feelings towards this big announcement that graced our screens a few days ago. If you did not know, Everlane, the brand that literally built its entire identity on the idea of being honest, transparent, and ethical, was just sold to SHEIN. Taking it back a few years, I actually worked at a sustainable denim production factory in California, known as the cleanest denim factory in the world at the time. And this was all due to its innovative, game-changing technology to save water, energy, and so much more. I remember my first week at that company and going through the brands that we were producing for, right? And one of them actually was Everlane. The commitment to sustainability was ingrained into their ethos. That is something that we have seen so clearly. Everlane is a brand that became famous for telling you exactly how much your t-shirt cost to make, right? It was famous about telling us what the factory looked like, who sewed the t-shirt, all of that. And now this company is being sold to arguably the most opaque, detrimental fast fashion operation on the planet. And financially speaking, the truth about this deal is that the people who held common stock in the company didn't really walk away with much from this deal. I want to break down what actually happened here, because this isn't just an Everlane story. It's the same story we keep watching on repeat, or at least we've seen this a couple times now. So if you care about building any consumer business at all, there are so many lessons to be learned here. And without further ado, let's dive in. So before dissecting this Everlane story, I want to quickly reference Allbirds, another values-forward brand, another sustainability darling, another company that raised a genuinely staggering amount of money, okay? And when they were exiting a couple months ago, they announced to be selling their assets for $39 million. If you didn't know, Allbirds had raised over 200 million USD in funding before going public. Its IPO valued the company at $4 billion, but it sold for only 39 million. That's less than 12% of the cash it originally raised from the public. Can you imagine that? That is crazy. And I'm such a huge believer in valuation being such a vanity metric. I actually uploaded a video last week talking about some lessons from Emma Greed's book, and a core quote I remember was, "Valuation is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is king." But everyone in the startup and business world is so enamored by valuation, which makes sense to an extent, but it doesn't always unfold in the best ways when profit ends up being shared. So we've got two brands, both built on values. Both Allbirds and Everlane share these values around transparency, sustainability, and just doing things differently, right? And both of these brands raised enormous amounts of money, and both ended up in fire sales, to sum it up. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think it's a pattern worth talking about. Now, here's the part of this Everlane story that I find genuinely fascinating and a tad bit concerning, if I'm being honest, right? So the founder came from private equity. No background in fashion, no experience in apparel, supply chains, production, sourcing, none of that, okay? He was about 25, I believe, and he taught himself the basics from scratch. And before he'd even really figured out how to run a production properly, he engineered a launch. There was a referral system, a cost breakdown post that was everywhere, and he ended up gathering about 60,000 email subscribers in 5 days for shirts that he didn't even have in stock yet, right? And investors saw that number and wrote checks. Granted. But what happened next is the kind of thing that anyone with real apparel industry experience could have called. So he assumed 60,000 subscribers meant he should order 60,000 shirts. He placed a massive manufacturing order and the batch came out wrong. So he had a batch that was badly dyed, poorly stitched, and just pretty much inconsistent, so he couldn't sell it. And so he wrote off a huge chunk of inventory. If you are in the apparel or consumer business, you can already imagine how much of a nightmare that can be. And so the company was left with almost nothing in the bank in the beginning. And then he went and found more investors. I'm not saying any of this to be harsh or critical, I'm not trying to be that at all, but that story is important because it shows you what the model actually rewards. It wasn't product knowledge, it wasn't industry experience, which is so emphasized nowadays, but that's not always what they're looking for. It was the ability to engineer a signal, okay, to show a number that looked impressive and to basically use that to unlock capital. And that's a system that's been going on for a while. Then actual business came second, right? This is a very standard way, to be honest, of business, by the way, for, certain individuals in certain parts of the world. But back to the story. Everlane's whole brand was built on 3 pillars. They literally called it radical transparency, and it was keep the earth clean, keep earth cool, do right by people. To be honest, I think that's beautiful positioning, right? I really, really loved it. It's genuinely resonant messaging. But a brand value is not a business model. And when you take institutional money, you're not just taking cash, okay? You're taking on a legal, structural obligation to serve that capital. Full stop. So what happens is the values become marketing. The mission becomes a mood board. And when the numbers stop working, when growth slows, when the market shifts, and when debt starts to pile up, none of that positioning is able to really protect you. That's the honest truth. So you end up just selling to whoever is willing to buy. Allbirds' co-founder actually said something really honest when it all fell apart. He admitted that the rapid success that they had compressed the time they had actually left to build and evolve, and that in chasing it, they lost some of their DNA. If I'm being honest, this is the type of truth and humility I adore from founders, especially when it comes to balancing the pressure of institutional capital and a very heavy mission-driven business. What he said is a really painful thing to admit publicly, so I applaud him, but I think it's genuinely true. When growth becomes the only metric that matters, everything else, I'm talking the product, the story, the actual reason behind why the brand existed, everything kind of starts to bend around it, right? And so things just start to fall through the cracks. Just to put it plainly, Everlane raised millions, accumulated around $90 million in debt, and got absorbed by the most aggressive race to the bottom operator in the industry. And then we have Allbirds. They raised over $200 million, lost $419 million across 5 fiscal years, and sold for $39 million to a company most people have not really even heard of. These weren't small mistakes. These were the inevitable outcomes of a model where valuation was treated as success, where the number on paper became the thing instead of the actual business underneath it. And I have to go back to the quote from before. Valuation is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is king. That's it. That's the whole lesson in one sentence. Look, I'm not saying raising money is inherently wrong. I'm trying to raise money soon. So I'm not saying you can never build something big and values driven at the same time. I actually do think profit and impact can coexist. But I think what these stories expose is a specific kind of trap. And it's a trap that's really easy to fall into when you're building something in a creative industry, because the aesthetics of doing it the right way and the aesthetics of doing it the VC way can almost look identical from the outside. The brand that says we care about people and the planet, and the brand that's just using that as a growth hook and somewhat greenwashing, they look the same on Instagram. They even look the same on a pitch deck, okay? The difference only becomes visible later when things get hard. And I think the question worth asking, whether you're building something right now or you're just watching this space and just closely learning, is this: what is the actual foundation here? Is the story and the messaging true? If so, what will your non-negotiables be in order to keep that story and vision alive? And now it's easier said than done, but this is definitely a good place to start, because when you build on something real with core values and a product that people genuinely love, right? You build a community that actually trusts you and margins that make sense. That to me is the core part of the business. When all of these are considered and looked after carefully, they become the glue that holds everything together, even when the market shifts. Not the valuation, not the press, not the glitz and glamorous things, right? Not the number of subscribers before you even know that you've made a thing. But again, it's all easier said than done. I definitely applaud every single founder who is able to build anything from the ground up and scale it to any dimension. It takes work. And I'm glad, honestly, that these stories exist, because now I have case studies, you have case studies, we all have case studies to learn from. That's the beauty of people's stories going into the mainstream, if I'm being honest. Everlane and Allbirds will probably get written about as cautionary tales about like sustainability brands or direct-to-consumer brands or whatever category feels convenient for some people. But I think the real story is deeper and sometimes more complex than that. Yes, they got rewarded early for a certain look, but the money that came in to accelerate them ended up being the thing that unraveled them. That is so interesting, and I think there's a lot to learn from that. So if you are watching this, my message to you is build something real. Grow at a pace you can actually manage, and keep your eye on the actual business and core values, not just the story you're telling about the business. And so if this got you thinking, drop a comment. I would love to know what you took from this. Feel free to like, share, and subscribe. If you don't know, you should know that I post weekly videos around creativity and business. And as I always say to my lovely watchers, you are built different and built to last. Thank you, and I will see you in the next one.